Thanks again, everyone, for joining us this morning. This is our second webinar. Again, we're learning along as we go. Last week's webinar, we had the four of us in the office. This week, we're practicing our social distancing. So our three experts today are all placed variously around the region. So yeah, we're sort of working our way through this as best we can. As I said, a lot has changed over the last week, and then there were certainly more changes that were announced late yesterday afternoon, and I'll touch on that in a second. But firstly, I'd like to welcome our panel. We're really privileged to be joined by three real experts in their fields today, particularly around that really important issue at the moment of our employees and making sure that we're looking after our employees. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Yvonne Walker. Yvonne is the Principal and Director of HR with Ease. She's got over 30 years experience in the industry. She's joined by Dr. Barry McNamara, who's the Managing Director of Mentor Services, who provide specialise in workplace psychology and employee assistance programs. And then also Natasha Osmond-Dreyer, who's the Principal at Blue Marbles, a 17-year global corporate career, and Natasha specialises in vision and strategy for businesses, but also brings an area of expertise, particularly in managing and working with remote teams. So again, I'd like to welcome our three experts today, and really, we do really appreciate your time. I thought I'd just give a quick update as to what was announced yesterday at 4 o'clock. No doubt everybody has heard of, along the grapevine, social media, mainstream media, of the $1,500 JobKeeper payment, $1,500 JobKeeper payment. And we really have been inundated with calls as to what that means for clients. The short answer is we don't actually know what it really means for everyone. The size of the measure, which was announced at $130 billion, requires legislation, and that legislation won't be prepared until at least early next week. There'll be a consultation period with some industry groups to iron out, I guess, the finer detail of the legislation. Then needs to get approved by the Parliament, which has been recalled to pass this legislation through. So we'll certainly know more towards the end of the week. But what we do know are some of the key features, and basically what it is, it's a payment to encourage businesses to retain their employees, and the government will pay the first $1,500 a fortnight to businesses. It'll be administered in a similar way that the paid parental scheme is administered at the moment, whereby the ATO will actually make the payment to the business, and then the business will pay the employee through their normal payroll system. My understanding is that it applies to employees that are currently employed or have been stood down, but we can have a little bit of a chat with Yvonne about that a little bit later as to what standing down employees might mean. And it applies to full-time and part-time employees, sole traders, and casuals that have been with their business for more than 12 months. Probably the sting in the tail is that the payment is to be made, or the cash flow is to be funded by the employer at this stage. So the payments can start immediately, but the employers won't receive their first payment from the ATO until early May. So any payments made between now and then will need to be funded out of the cash flow of the business. And clearly there'll be some challenges around how we might go about that, unless they sort of change the scheme slightly over the next coming days. Probably the point which creates a lot of the uncertainty is the eligibility criteria. It applies to businesses with turnover of less than $1 billion, which safely puts all our clients under that threshold. They need to show that their business has a reduction in turnover by 30%. Now, that was all that was announced. We're not sure over what period that is to be measured. So certainly the detail of all of that will come out over the next coming week or so. Clearly, those businesses that have been forced to close, you would assume would be eligible straight away. Probably the grey area are those businesses that are still operating and working out whether their turnover has been reduced by 30% and what period that relates to. So the payment won't be subject to superannuation. It will be taxable, however. It'll be taxable in the hands of the employees. As I said, won't be subject to superannuation payments and probably exempt from workers' comp and payroll tax, we'd expect as well. So it applies, it's been backdated retrospectively as well. It will apply to anyone that was employed on the 1st of March, even if those employees have already been stood down. The idea is that it creates that connection between the employee and the employer, so they'll continue to receive their, in effect, welfare payments through their employer rather than through the Centrelink system. So it's going to free up capacity on the Centrelink side of things. It will create a little bit more work for employers, but the reality is with the single touch payroll and everything else that's been set up over the last year, that's not going to be overly onerous. So we might leave that side of things there. As I said, we'll know more in the coming week or so, and we'll be communicating that out and working with clients along with the other stimulus messages, or stimulus measures, that might apply to your business over the coming weeks. So what I'd like to do now is welcome Yvonne into the conversation, and she's just unmuted herself. So thanks, Yvonne. Hello, Yvonne. How you going?
Thank you. Hi, everyone out there. Thanks for coming along this morning.
So I guess really what we want to have a sort of a chat about today, I guess, is, how can we prepare our business from a HR perspective for this period of so-called hibernation? Seems to be the way that the government's talking about putting businesses into hibernation, and we all know that it's not as easy as flicking off the light switch and then walking away and then turning it back on when we're all allowed to move around again. So the single biggest question that we've been asked is, can I stand down employees? What's the criteria for standing down employees? Sorry, my computer wanted to reboot then. What's the criteria for standing down employees and the difference between standing down and a termination, I guess?
Sure. Okay. Look, I'm going to preface this with there's always a need for consultation. Keep your workforce involved in the discussion and involved in what's going on as much as possible, because essentially in most workplaces, consultation is key to actually being able to show that you've done the right thing and treated people fairly. So always involve your workforce as much as you possibly can in it. Look, you've already talked about the fact, Mark, that if somebody is still in touch with their employer, that's really preferable to having them disengaged and going through the welfare system, which means that standing down, if you can achieve it with your workforce, is preferable to laying people off for a whole range of reasons. If your business is closed because of an enforced government decision. So our hairdressers, not our hairdressers, surprisingly, our beauty therapists, our gyms. If your business is closed because of an enforced government decision, then that's a very clear case where under the Fair Work Act, you can actually stand your employees down. If there's a stoppage of work and it's outside of your control, the Fair Work Act also allows you to do it. Some workplaces may have specific enterprise agreements with provisions that don't allow for forced stand down. I think that's probably relatively rare in your client base, Mark, but some businesses may have that, and it's always worth double checking the award as well to make sure that there's nothing in the award that says you can't stand people down. But essentially the Fair Work Act basically does allow for situations that are completely outside the employer's control.
I think just that point on the award there is a number of awards are being temporarily amended at the moment.
Yes. So the Clark's Award was amended, I think, on Thursday or Friday. The Restaurant Industry Award, I think, is before the Commission this morning. And the reason that both unions and employer groups have gone to the Commission and asked for these by agreement changes is to allow employers more flexibility to do things differently. Some of these awards, in particular, say the Clark's Award, covers a lot of people in our workforce, and it's fairly inflexible in terms of, say, working from home or span of hours if someone needs to needs to homeschool their children during the day and wants to do a bit of work at night. So the fact that the award is so inflexible means that you have to jump through a lot of hoops to actually get that agreement in place with employees. And what they've done with the Clark's Award is made some fairly significant changes to the minimum number of hours that people can work if they're covered by the clerical award, and also the span of hours, so the time at which they can do their work, which means greater flexibilities for employers and employees to actually allow working from home and make it work.
Sure. So if, I guess, again, across our client base, it's quite clear there are a group of clients that aren't allowed to trade: restaurants, cafes, beauty salons and the like. Clearly they are required to stand their employees down. We've got a bigger group of clients whose business is affected whilst they're able to trade. The customers have gone into hibernation themselves or isolation themselves. So technically not required to close, but going through the assessment to make sure whether it's viable to stay open. And we've seen a number of retail chains over the last week announce that they're shutting stores. Are the stand down provisions likely to apply to those businesses who, are at a point where they can't go on because their turnover's been impacted?
Look, this is where I would always say consultation is important, because if you're saying to your employees, the option is to let you go, or the option is to stand you down for a period, and as soon as we can, we'll get you back up and running and we'll stay in touch, then you may have a better chance of actually getting agreement to stand them down rather than actually having to force a stand down. I would suggest that if you are in that situation, that you get legal advice, and the size of the stores that we're talking about having done this, Michael Hill Jewelers, Q, Veronica Main, all the ones I know, they're big businesses, so they will have sought legal advice before taking the decision to close their stores and force their staff to stand down. So I would always seek some advice on it. At the end of the day, if you can't pay your bills and you can't pay your staff, something has to give. So, that's consultation, and keeping people informed about what's going on is so important to try and get agreement to do it rather than having to force it.
I guess we would go down the path that a business is faced with that decision and they do need to, I guess, voluntarily close the doors. Let's assume they have the option to actually terminate the employment relationship with their employees or to stand down. How are employee entitlements affected under both of those scenarios?
So if you are terminating someone, then obviously you're paying them out their accrued entitlements, their accrued annual leave. In New South Wales, if they have more than 5 years of service, 5 or more years of service, then they're entitled to be paid out their accrued long service leave. And redundancy may also apply if the business has 15 or more employees. So from a cash flow perspective, termination also may not be an ideal outcome for businesses at this point in time, given that they're not sure what's going to happen with cash flow. And if you have long-serving employees, there may be large redundancy payments due to them. In terms of stand down, they're still employed, and their annual leave and their sick leave actually still continue to accrue while they're on forced stand down. So when they come back to work, they just pick up with continuity of service as they had before.
Yeah. So in that case, can an employee that stood down access their annual leave, for example, or is that at the employer's discretion?
Well, certainly some of the awards that have been modified to make that more easily available. So annual leave can only be reasonably refused on reasonable business grounds. So if there's no work for someone to do and they have a large annual leave balance, you'd be hard pressed as an employer to argue that they can't access some of that leave unless you have absolutely no cash flow whatsoever. So I'll come back to the question, Mark. I'm sorry, I've lost it.
So can an employee that's been stood down request to take leave, I guess?
Yeah, they can. And look, as I said, as I started to say, the Clark's Award has certainly been modified, and that's one of the things they're putting into the Restaurant Industry Award to allow for the provision that, you know, employees can actually choose to take their annual leave at half pay for twice the time is the other thing. I guess, again, it's an individual thing. They can request it, and if you as a business can afford to pay it and keep someone paying their rent, then, you know, or their mortgage, then I would recommend doing that if you can.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions regarding the flexible arrangements. There's one from Gary from Kiama. I'm not sure who that is. If you agree to flexible work conditions with your employee, what should you be doing to protect yourself further down the track? Documentation, I guess, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, good question, Gary. So, look, there is wriggle room within most of the awards in the sense of individual flexibility arrangements. And there is a particular format that they have to be in. So if you can get agreement to vary the hours of work or the penalty rates or something that's in that award for the best of both parties, then, you know, I would make sure that you follow the template that you need to follow, and make sure everything's included in that individual flexibility arrangement, and that it's signed off, and that there's no suggestion that there's been any duress on the employee by the employer to sign it.
Okay. Just another quick one in relation to flexible arrangements. And this is a common one that we see, that if you're looking to stand someone down because you don't have enough work, but it might be that there's the odd hour or two that they might do each week if required, is it possible to sort of, I guess, stand them down, put them on a retainer type payment so they can just do bits and pieces while they're not working, provided that's negotiated with the employee?
That sounds a lot like the JobKeeper arrangement to me, or the JobKeeper payment.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what it's intended to cover.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, cool. And that question did come in last week, so things have changed since last week. That's really good. Probably the one thing that we focused on, you know, the impact of this virus that's having on business and the continuity of business and the like. But I wouldn't mind just touching on what the I guess obligations are for a business if one of their employees becomes infected or is required to self-isolate.
Okay. So firstly, if someone is diagnosed, then obviously they can't come to work. And you would also be wanting to check amongst your workforce whether anyone had contact with them. So I know of several employers locally who have had to send their workforce home into self-isolation, either because the person has tested positive or because they've had close contact with this person who potentially has it and now has to await a test result. Obviously, you want to be looking for some work from home arrangements if somebody is ill and they're asymptomatic or they haven't got severe symptoms. And, you know, Natasha is going to cover off on all the good stuff about working from home for us later on. That would obviously be your first thing you'd be trying to do. But, you know, isolating them from the rest of your workforce and making sure that anybody else in the workforce that has had close contact with them is potentially isolated as well is really critical. If they are sick, then they are entitled to sick leave, either paid or unpaid leave, if they don't have enough of a sick leave balance.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing that, you know, it'll vary from business to business, but a lot of employers do have sick leave balances. Probably the point to clarify there is that if you're diagnosed, you're eligible to take personal leave or carers leave. But if you're required to isolate and you haven't been diagnosed, does it change in that regard?
Yeah, look, there are two views on this. So, you know, the Fair Work Act doesn't allow you to pay out sick leave. However, it's really my view, and this is not legal advice, but my view is if somebody is required to self-isolate and it's going to protect your workforce from potentially being more impacted, and they have a sick leave balance, and the reason that they have a sick leave balance is because they haven't actually used it or accessed it or abused it, then I would think it would be reasonable to agree to allow them to take some of that sick leave as paid time, or some of that time off as paid sick leave, sorry. It's not technically paying the time out, It's more of an insurance policy for the business around not impacting on other employees.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess we're all learning a little bit as we go in this scenario as well. So I guess when it does come to that is to tread warily and take some advice before you make any decisions.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. Was there anything else that you wanted to add there? I think that was a really good summary of most of the issues that are facing employers at the moment, and obviously employees. And it's, we're going to see more and more of this if we go into additional businesses being forced to close. But also we've got this payment, JobKeeper payment coming on board as well. So.
And look, I think the JobKeeper payment has really been a response to government understanding how desperate small business in particular is around this, because I have clients say in motivational speaking and their workload has been completely decimated within the space of days. They can't afford to keep paying people, but when they're up and running, they need these people. So it's really important that businesses don't fall down and then can't get back up again when the upswing occurs, because there is going to be an upswing, and for some businesses it's going to be massive. Think about beauticians. We're all going to want to go to the beautician, right, when they're open again. So it's going to be a massive upswing, and you don't want to be out there trying to hire people or trying to get people back that have now gone on to be able to find other work or something. So the JobKeeper allowance, I think, is really important, and I'm really keen to understand exactly how it's going to work for my clients as well. And look, the only other thing I want to comment on, Mark, and I'm sure Barry and Natasha will touch on this as well, is that leadership and communication is so critical in this period. Leaders have to make tough decisions, and I think we're seeing that from our government at the moment. Whether or not we agree with them, there are tough decisions that they have to make. And leaders in a business are no different. So even though sometimes those decisions are going to impact on people, you have to communicate with them, and you have to understand that they need some certainty as much as possible from you as well. I think that's probably enough from me, because I know Barry and Natasha have lots of awesome things to share as well. So thanks heaps, Mark, for the opportunity to speak today.
Thanks, Yvonne. Really appreciate it. That's actually a good opportunity to bring Barry into the conversation. So welcome again, Barry.
Hey, Mark.
The issue of employees, that is going to be probably the most difficult thing for employers to deal with. We have close relationships with our employees, particularly small businesses. They're really an extension of our family. In a lot of cases, we see more of our employees than we actually see of our families. And as Yvonne pointed out, making those tough decisions when we know it's going to impact on the people that I guess we're closest to is going to be really, really difficult. So I guess what we want to have a bit of a chat about is how best do we do that? Keeping in mind that we've got a couple of different groups that are vulnerable out there. There are a group of employees that have already lost their jobs or have been stood down. There's a separate group that are living day to day, wondering whether they'll have a job in the coming days or the coming weeks, and I guess all that comes with that. We've also got a group of employees there that have guaranteed job security, but there are other factors at play that they're actually going out into the community and exposing themselves potentially to risks. So probably, we'd like to look after the welfare of our employees. And what are probably some of the warning signs that our employees might not be coping?
Yep, good point. And you're right. There's 168 hours in a week. Theoretically, we're supposed to spend a third of those asleep, which brings us down to about 112 hours. We commute to and from work. So really, we've got about 100 productive hours in the week, and about 40 of those are spent in the workplace. So what that means is that 40% of our week really is in contact with people that we work with. And because we have this close contact with people, we get to know people really, really well. Whether you're aware of it or not, you get to know when people are, for example, morning people. You get to know when people are in a good mood. You get to know when they're in a bad mood. And by the way, and they detect changes in you as well. So what we're advising here is that you know each other really well. Therefore, it's contingent upon you to be aware of changes in people. Now, people often say, what are the signs and symptoms? You could write a book on those sort of things. But what we try and do is simplify it down and say, because you know your people really well, therefore you know when they're not their normal selves. And that's what you should be looking out for. People who were previously gregarious and social are now withdrawn, or who had previously a positive attitude are now quite negative. People who were previously active now, for example, avoid exercise, or people who are easygoing beforehand are now really snappy and short-tempered. So if you notice these changes, I think we have a human responsibility to each other to have a conversation about that. And what we advocate people to do is to talk to the other person and to say, I notice that you're not your normal self. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah.
Now, we typically avoid these conversations because they can be a bit awkward, but I think we need to, particularly in this special time, we need to take that risk.
Yeah, and I guess it extends a little bit further than the employee. The impact on their family as well.
Yes.
We spoke briefly before we came on air about the whole new experience of homeschooling and the challenges that might have in the family home.
Yes. So we do a lot of workplace psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist. I see clients every day. One of the common issues that are being thrown up at the present time is the impact on relationships, and these are for both people who remain in the workplace and also for people who are now being stood down and they're at home. One of the things we know about relationships, Mark, is that many of them continue because people have an implicit agreement with each other about little things that annoy them. And these little things are tolerable if you don't have to spend 24 hours a day with that other person. What we're finding is that these little things are now becoming exaggerated. So, previously when you didn't put the top on the toothpaste, we could live with that. Now when you're exposed to this all day, then it becomes an issue. And obviously that's a trivial thing. What we're finding is that people are getting quite short-tempered and tetchy about being cooped up together. Partners, relationships, children, friends, family. These are the sort of things we should be looking out for. Changes in people's functioning and how that impacts on our relationships. And if this is an issue, don't ignore it. Have a discussion with that other person about something that's annoying you, because if you don't, these things are going to build up over time.
Yeah. And I guess that you then extend that to business owners themselves as a collective, and that's something that Gary touched on in our webinar last week about don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help.
Yes.
This is not normal. There's no textbook in how to get through this. It's okay to ask for help, and we see our staff at the moment, to use an example, that they're seeing what all their clients are going through. So it's not uncommon for someone to have 50 different clients going through the same thing and having to deal with that. And obviously, given the relationship and the way that we're invested in our clients' businesses, that can be quite difficult.
So what we're seeing right now and what we're finding in this new normal that we're all being exposed to is that there's a lot of anxiety amongst people. Keeping in mind that anxiety is a symptom, it's not the cause of the problem. And what we're finding is that people like predictability. They like to know that tomorrow is going to be pretty much the same as today. These present circumstances have turned that predictability on its head. So now people are getting this sense of, I don't know what's happening. I'm getting mixed messages. I'm getting new messages every day. New information is coming out every day. People are overwhelmed. So essentially what they're saying is that they find themselves in situations where they don't feel in control. And as soon as we don't feel in control, our response to that lack of control is to experience anxiety. So as psychologists, what we're trying to do is help people get a sense of control in this out of control situation that we're in currently.
Yeah, and I guess you touched on a little bit there, information overload. And I know that I've had some family and friends that have disconnected themselves from Facebook, for example, because there's just all this information coming out. There's people that are running their own agendas, and some people are just turning off because it's just too much for them.
Yep. So sort of stuff that we're looking for here is trying to establish a routine. So right now people aren't in a routine because they might be in a workplace that doesn't have the usual complement of people, or they're working from home, or there's a mixture. So we suggest to people that they have a routine, some sort of predictability in what they're doing, an idea of what they have to do every day, even if it's setting out an agenda, because at the end of the day, you want to feel good about yourself. Remember, we're talking about getting that sense of control. So it's important that people look at those sort of issues. We're also emphasising that you've got to look after yourself. And the three things we've got to look after ourselves during this time are our diet, and that can be an issue when you're at home and exposed to all sorts of temptations that you wouldn't have in the workplace. Getting adequate sleep and getting enough exercise as well. So beforehand in the workplace, when you might move around a fair bit, if you're at home, you might find that that's been circumscribed. We're advocating people to look at their exercise regimes as well, so you're looking after yourself. In terms of seeking support, I think that's really important. Business owners think, well, I'm looking after everybody else and therefore that will address my needs. Don't ignore yourself, because you're in the same situation as everybody else. If people are looking for support, there's a lot of support services that are available out there, and we strongly encourage people to access those.
Yeah, and that was probably one of the things that we spoke about as a partnership group here. This concept of everyone working from home, you lose that sense of a weekend.
Yes.
Because people aren't physically going to work Monday and Friday, and all of a sudden the 5 days blends into 7 days. And I think that's a really important point that you make, is that you do need to stop at some time and spend time with the family, or go for a walk, or just give your brain an opportunity to have some downtime.
Yeah, and I'm sure Natasha's going to talk about those issues in terms of working from home, so I'll let her go through that. But it's really important as business owners, don't ignore your own situation. Don't think you can deal with your own situation simply by looking after other people. You need to be looking after yourself as well.
Yeah. Just changing tack a little bit, there are going to be some more difficult conversations that employers are going to have with employees over the coming weeks and months, hopefully not too much longer than that. Typically, those conversations would have been done face-to-face in a private or secure location, for want of a better word. How do we go about delivering bad news in this environment where we're not allowed to be near people?
I think Yvonne said before in her presentation, this is where true leaders stand up. Yes, we are going to have these difficult conversations. People often think, I'll try and mollify it as much as possible. I'll try and tone it down as much as possible. I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. I don't think that's being honest with the individual. So I think straight up you need to say to people, we need to have this conversation. I want to be as open and honest and transparent as possible with you. And I think that sets the tone for the conversation. Give people the facts. Don't try and sugarcoat it. People need to know where they stand. We talked before about the sense of being in control. You give people a sense of control by giving them as much information as possible. So yes, these are going to be difficult conversations. These are conversations that need to be had. This is where we really step up and show our true leadership skills.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is making sure that the employee is supported through the process, and part of that is referring them to people that they can talk to themselves, people such as yourself. But also, the other thing about this JobKeeper payment, if it's a stand down, it actually takes them away from the Centrelink side of things. It's actually really easy for them now to get their money. Yes, there's a cash flow impact on the employer, but that might be a cost they're willing to pay just to make it as easy as possible for an employee that's been stood down.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be a bit more seamless than beforehand. Keeping in mind that what we know is that on any given day, on a good day in Australia, 20% of Australians would benefit from talking to somebody about something that's concerning them. So if that's just the background that's going on, these circumstances superimposed on that background is certainly going to have an impact on people.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. We really appreciate your insight there, Barry. Excellent advice for business owners, for both their work in their business life, but also their family life as well. So I really appreciate your time today. Thanks, Barry.
Happy to help out, Mark.
No worries. I'll just bring Natasha into the conversation now. Just make sure you can hear me okay. You there, Tash?
Certainly can. Good morning.
We'll probably, again, just change the focus a little bit to those businesses that are still able to operate, albeit not under normal circumstances. So I guess, the clear example for that for us is our firm here. At the moment, we have 2 staff and myself in the office. The rest of our staff are working remotely from home. And we're finding, that we need to make the best out of this situation. Clearly, there's a need from clients' point of view to access us and to get some support. But there's challenges involving, managing remote teams and doing things differently and often doing it for the first time. So just wondering whether we could probably start off by, some tips, I guess, for managing our team members in a remote context.
Yep. So Barry mentioned before the fact that when we're in a workplace, we get to know people really well. We have all of these touch points with people if you're in a building that's got a lift lobby, for example, you might see people in the lift lobby and check in and say hi. You go to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, you'll see them then, you'll check in. So all of these less formal conversations that we would have on a day-to-day basis in a workplace aren't happening anymore. So what happens is a workplace will come in and say, okay, well, we need to do a check-in. So we'll put a video conference on. Here we are, we're on the video conference. And if you notice the way that we're all talking to each other, it's very formal. So the tendency can be that when we first set up a remote team, we remember the fact that we need to communicate and we need to check in. So we set up a video call and we say, we're going to do a check-in. It's going to be 5 minutes. It's going to be quick. It's going to be easy. And the danger is that we slip into formality and we don't have that casual conversation that we would normally have. And it rather than a 5-minute catch up with a cup of coffee, it actually takes 25, 35, 40 minutes up to an hour, depending on how many people you've got in your team. So it's really important that we have those catch-ups, but it's important to make a distinction between the informal ones and the formal ones. So the informal ones, you'll be watching for what people are doing on the video conference. Barry talked about those signs and symptoms. You can see somebody who might not be feeling so well or behaving differently. You're looking for those on a webinar or a video conference as opposed to looking for them in person. I would make your less formal check-ins limited to a really short period of time. Get people to bring a cup of coffee, maybe play a few games. There are lots of different things that you can do to engage with people and have that clear distinction between a less formal interaction and a more formal interaction. To your point, Mark, lots of people are working from home for the first time. You're using this wonderful technology that we have for the first time potentially, and it can be quite exhausting. We've got to a point societally where we're more used to text messaging each other and emailing each other than we are having face-to-face conversations. And I don't know if anybody on the call has noticed this already, but it can actually be quite exhausting talking to people face to face, because you kind of, you get to the end of the day and you're like, wow, I'm absolutely knackered because I've spent all this time talking with people that I don't actually really normally talk to. And because we're not doing those quick 2-minute bites of conversations around the coffee machine or at the fridge or at the escalators, it's taking a lot more out of us energetically. And so we get a lot tireder at the end of the day.
I know exactly what you're talking about there. There's been a couple of times, particularly last week, where I've got home and my voice has been a bit croaky and husky, and I've been asked whether I feel like I've got the coronavirus, and I said, no, I've actually just been talking on the phone all day.
All day, yeah.
All day. So yeah, I think the other thing is how do we look at maintaining productivity and the quality of the work that we're doing and that sort of stuff, given, like we said, people are working from home for the first time. Their work environment has different challenges at home than what it does in the office. And what sort of things do we need to accept? We need to accept that things are going to be different. But what are the other sort of, I guess, strategies for maintaining some level of efficiency during this process?
Look, that's a really good question. First and foremost, there is not a one size fits all for everybody. And there are lots of different strategies out there that we'll hear about that might work for us, but also might not work for us. So I guess my first plea to everybody that's listening is don't be hard on yourself. If you think that you've got an idea about what a day might look like or what a week might look like, and you've set yourself up and it doesn't work, then adapt. And this is the thing about change that we're looking at the moment, is that we actually might need to adapt and adapt and adapt on a day-to-day basis until we find a routine that actually works for us. Now, I'm a big fan in the morning of setting an intention for the day, and what that's going to be like, and how you're going to turn up, and how you want to be, and what you want to achieve in that day. So my top tip would be, first thing in the morning, that you write down 3 things that you want to achieve that day. And actually, I was coaching somebody the other day, and we were talking about the fact that what she ended up doing was, it was 3 things for her work, 3 things for her family, and 3 other things for her health and fitness as well. So it actually ended up being a few more things than 3, but she segmented those off, excuse me, and put them in different buckets so that she could allocate time to each of those things. And that allows you at the end of the day to look back and say, how did I do? Did I achieve those things? And not beat yourself up because you didn't, but have that realization of, well, if I didn't, what do I need to adjust tomorrow that means that I'm going to have a more productive day? So if your intention is to do what you need to do and to do the main thing, then do that. But I would absolutely set, so my intention for the day is to be X. And then these are the 3 things that I want to achieve in maybe 3 different buckets.
Yeah, and I guess from a manager's point of view, when you're leading a team member and your team members now working remotely, that your expectations probably need to change. In the fact that something that might have already ordinarily had been done, say prior to lunch, might now get done a little bit later on because there are other challenges in the work environment, and I guess strategies for dealing with those types of scenarios.
Yeah, so again, this is where over communication is the key. So visibility, communication, and expectation are all really important, and you've touched on those, and Yvonne and Barry have both touched on those as well. So having that ability, so whether you use something like a Trello board or some sort of cloud-based system whereby people say, this is what I intend to do. I've never been somebody who has cared at what point in the day somebody does it, as long as it gets done. And I think now more than ever, we have to adapt and shift to that mentality of, okay, well, these are the things that I need you to do. So as a manager to somebody working for them, you'd have a check-in. So whether you do it on a computer or whether you do it a verbal check-in in the morning. So say I'm talking to you. So Mark, you work for me. You and I have a quick 5-minute conversation in the morning with a cup of coffee. And you say, these are the 3 things, Tash, that I want to do today. And I say, great. Actually, Mark, that 3rd one is the most important one for me. So that's that clarity of expectation. And I might then say, actually, I don't really mind if you don't do the other 2. I really want you to do that first one. And I appreciate that you're in this situation or this is going to happen. So there's some flexibility there. But that's where that again, it's the communication and it's the expectation. And potentially this, organizationally, we're not that good necessarily at being really clear as to what we want people to do. And this is a really great opportunity to practice some of those things around clarity and clarity of expectation. So because you're being clear, it doesn't mean you're being mean. It doesn't mean you're expecting too much of somebody. It's a different way of communicating, which actually, if we get it right, leads to the best performance that we would ever have seen. So I would encourage people to sit in that space of being really clear. And I my hypothesis is that at the end of this, if you manage to do that, that you'll have a better working relationship and actually get better results.
Yeah, exactly right. And like I said, for a lot of people, we're learning as we go along. In the last, and I think I mentioned earlier on before we came on that, you know, in our office, we've probably seen a year's worth of innovation in a week or in a fortnight. And that's difficult because in some cases it has an advantage because we don't have another choice. But quite often with change, different people adapt it at different paces. We've got people that lead the way in relation to change, another group of people that will wait and see that the change is working before they jump on board, and then another group of people that really struggle with change. And it's probably that third group that are the most vulnerable at the moment because their world is changing. And as managers of people, you know, what are some of the things we can do to help the people in that group?
I would say that it's the acknowledgement that change isn't easy for everybody. So if I give an example for myself, I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and working in corporate when my 7-year-old was born, it was really important to me. So I had a national role, and it was really important to me that I spent as much time as possible at home. And I started using video conferencing, dialing in, learning how to listen differently and learning how to pick up visual cues on video conferencing more so than ever, because that suited me and that suited my needs at the time. Now that's been a 7-year journey to today. So there's a lot of things that I've learned on the way, but that you've got a whole heap of people who have almost had some of the best things about their working day stripped away from them, which might be the people, might be the routine, it might be the fact that they're actually extroverts and they like being out there, and all of a sudden they're at home and they've got no one to be extroverted with apart from themselves, and maybe annoying their partner if they've got one. You've got introverts who, you know, potentially are quite loving this and loving the fact that they're working from home. I think everybody speeds up on that change curve a little bit faster. I gave an example before of one of the preschools that I work with. So I'm the president of one of the local preschools, and they had always said, you know, we're not having Facebook. It's not what we do. It's not what we're about. This has happened. And all of a suddenly, you've got some of the most change adverse people who are putting together a different way of communicating to the local community and to families, almost being forced into it. But if you're able to adopt a growth mindset about it, you actually can then see the benefit of it. So this is where, for everybody, mindset, and Barry touched on a little bit before, is so important. If we sit here and we think it's going to be doom and gloom, it is. But that's not to say that it has to be okay all the time, because it doesn't. Lord knows, you know, my business has fallen through the floor as well, because a lot of what I do is in with corporates and doing training and development for them. And of course, that's not happening anymore. It's okay to not be okay. So, you know, I gave myself a period of time where I got a bit angry and frustrated, but then you have to work out how you move forwards. And for those most vulnerable people, Mark, who you referred to before, it's actually saying, okay, well, I'll sit with you in this not being okay for a little bit, and then let's work together on how we move forwards. And it might not necessarily be you that helps them. It might be somebody else in the business. This is where we can all come together and help each other. So it might be a peer helping a peer. It might be a leader helping somebody. Don't forget, you've got mentors out there. You've got people that you can refer to. So take the time, step them through it. And it's okay to be where they're at in the process.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, really, really important. Really important. What I might do, just give my experts a heads up, is I'm going to put you all on the screen now, just so everyone can see you. So put your clothes back on, do whatever you need to do. People are going to be able to see you. Sure. I've no idea whether that worked or not, but I just, again, like to thank everybody for their time today. I'm sure everyone that's joined us today will get so much insight about how to navigate our way through this crisis. And, you know, don't use that word lightly. It is a crisis. But I think from a business point of view, you know, in every crisis there becomes opportunities. And I think the opportunities in each of the three areas, it is around leadership and is about having a better business at the end of this when we come through it. And there's certainly, as business owners, there's an opportunity there to provide more flexibility in the workplace. So from the HR side of things, we will see a lot more working from home going forward. That's going to create better outcomes for our employees. It's going to make us, you know, preferred employers, if you like. And it's really an opportunity to, we've been forced down this path now, and I don't believe we're going to go back to where we were. It gives us a really good opportunity to work on our communication and also our personal well-being, you know, making sure that we're talking to people and providing support services for not only our employees, but family members and the like. And then also opportunity to become better leaders and better managers, because we'll all learn through this process. And yeah, when we come out the other side with our businesses intact, ready to go again, when that switch gets flicked on and we can all move around again, I've no doubt that if we take the advice and the tips from our panel today, that we'll all have better businesses when we come through the other side. So again, I'd like to thank you for all joining in. I'd like to thank people participating from home or from their remote workplace. We will look at having another webinar at the same time next week. Probably 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning seems to work okay. I've got a message coming through quickly. That's Gary from Kiama. This guy's really annoying.
Gary.
He says, great work, everyone. Your expertise is very evident, very impressive. So well done, guys. Just a quick update from our office. Again, the office is open. The only people in the building at the moment, myself and Jenna and Jess, who looking after the mail and the phones. So everybody else is working remotely. So that's going pretty well. Just understand that you know, we'll get back to everybody as soon as we can. We've been inundated with calls and questions at the moment, and some of those questions, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have the answers to just yet. So we might leave it there. And thanks again, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mark.
Natasha.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Ta.
Bye.